Thanks very much, Zeb, for the invitation to come and speak. And I see that the work you're doing might is really important in where we're heading and what we're doing. And I know your team have put a lot of work into this. And I thank Zeb for all the hard work he's done to create rain because there's a lot of people hanging out for rain at the moment. So yeah. So my name's Richard Kite, and I'm the lead for Thriving Southland, which is an organisation which runs catchment groups throughout Southland. My background is I emigrated in 1988 from the UK. My family were farming, still are farming, in the Lake District of the UK. My cousins farm about 800 acres right smack by Coniston, if any of you know the Lake District. My earliest memories were as a child watching about 100 hectares of wetland being drained, and that was promoted by the government. And the interesting thing was, in my youth, I learnt to dry stone wall and to lay hedges and to manage and manage a sheep farm. I spent a lot of time cutting bracken fern. That was it was quite an interesting thing to watch, though, because now I talk to my cousins, and that 100 hectares is now wetland. So it's gone back. It's gone full circle, and part of that, and my thinking has been, it's interesting. You go over to Europe, and there's probably 800, 1,000 years of agriculture and the environment together, working together, and the things that I remember of the dry stone walls and the hedges and the biodiversity got to the 1980s and Thatcherism and the free market, and a lot of that got taken out. It actually got, well, and that's where that drainage came from. It got taken out, and actually now they've come to the place where actually we can farm with the environment, and we need to, and they put that back again. And the interesting thing to think about is they had a plan because it had always been there. So they know what it needs to look like. They know where they need to go. And we look at agriculture in New Zealand. For 150 years, it's been about development, and that's been driven, put my hand up, by Britain for starters, wanting food and productivity, feed the mother country, and all the way through. There's been a drive for productive land to be productive in the sense of being productive by producing goods. So I suppose what I get excited about is we've got to put that back, but we've got a clean slate to think about it, because we know what it was like. There was no agriculture, and we've got to put it back, but in a way where we can farm, but we can take into account the environment and understand that. And I think really so my role, and then I've also got to put my hand up and said, when I came here in 1988, I was dairy farming, and I was a dairy farmer right the way through to 2008, and then I changed into consulting around conversions. Again, driven by the market, driven by the sheep farmers that went into dairy because they just couldn't afford succession within their families. And you see what always drives it has been those socioeconomic drivers, and the government again was saying, we need to double production. I think we've got to a place now where everybody's starting to go, hang on, how do we put this back in a way where we can actually prosper off the land and biodiversity and environment all one together, rather than two different systems. When I look at the way agriculture is spoken about, it's talking about farm systems and it's talking about the environment, and actually the two are absolutely interconnected and should be interconnected. And when you talk about it and think about it, should be connected. Which gets me back to catchment groups. So catchment groups were started in 2012 in Southland. And for those who don't know what a catchment group is, it's just really a community around their waterway, understanding it, looking at it, and saying, what do we need to do? What are our challenges? Actually, really understanding what our challenges are, and then moving to actually change, and but also all the time remembering to stay in the space of, people have to have resilience in their communities and in their jobs, and 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 it's really important for this holistic approach to change. It's critical that we actually listen to each other in that space. The catchment groups were set up by farmers, and communities started coming into those catchment groups. Jenny, I'm not going to point. I'm going to point you out, Jenny. So Jenny's been a supporter of coming along to those groups, getting involved. I tell you all to get involved, because it's about the conversations that shift people. Acknowledge Hokunu Runanga as well. They've certainly got involved with our catchment groups, and there's difficult conversations throughout, but we've got to have those conversations. And I know, social media today, it's driven people in two different directions, and we're all shouting at each other and I used, that probably 20 years ago, they used to say, oh, you shouldn't sit on the fence. Well, actually, it's not a bad place now, because there's nobody on the fence. But that's the place where we've got to have our discussions, is in the middle ground, and actually understanding where everybody's coming from. Because I listen to both sides, and there's concerns and fear on both sides, and we actually need to get together in the middle and have those discussions. So Thriving Southland was set up by a board of cross-sectoral group of farmers who were listening to the basically the negativity in the primary sector. Farmers were really getting ground down by what was being said. They'd been on this pathway where everybody had been saying, we need to lift production, we need to lift productivity, not necessarily profit. There's a lot of production in there, and profits been missed in some areas. So there's a whole lot of negativity around. I was in the dairy industry during Dirty Dairy. Absolutely did nobody any favours. It highlighted what had happened, I'll say that. But from a point of getting people to move, you don't get people to move by shouting at them and making them feel uncomfortable. I think those discussions have to be had, because that's where the discussion here and the discussion here help the discussion on the fence. So if we remove this part of the discussion, everything shifts to the wrong way. And if we remove this part of the discussion, so I don't have a problem with either end of the discussion, but we also need to meet in the middle to talk about where we're heading. So catchment groups, we started and there've been catchment groups around for as long as there's been waterways, people interested in their waterways and developing them. And so I've got to be really careful that I say they're not a new thing. They're a thing that's been there for generations in different forms. But the Southland Catchment Group model that we've worked with was started in 2012, and it was regulation that actually started that. And farmers, there's conversation whether you either be part of the conversation or you'll end up being you're having to put up with what you're given. And so it became about being part of the conversation around change. And then NZ Landcare Trust took on those catchment groups till about 2018, which is when Thriving Southland came together, and it's a cross-sectoral group, which I think is really important, because again, we all need to come together around these conversations. When there's a lot of conversations in the political space, in the sector group space, and it's political, and people are trying to move the chess pieces to get the best outcome. Fascinating thing about catchment groups is when catchment group farmers sit around the table with their community, they're not talking about who's who in the zoo. There's a bit of finger pointing, but and it's not all rainbows and unicorns. But they're actually talking about their issues, their challenges as a community, and understanding and learning been given the information, understanding it, and then saying, what do we do with it? So we're now, Southland has got 35 catchment groups. That covers over 90% of the primary sector area of Southland. And they're all individual groups, they're all independent. Thriving Southland doesn't run them, they can tell us to whatever they want. We're just there to support them with what they do, what they ask for. They ask for the science, and I've heard in the past everybody says, you're always waiting for the science. If you get to the ground, not a lot of farmers have been given the science. The discussion's been up here, the science has been up here. One of the first pieces of work Thriving Southland was asked to do by the catchment groups was get all the water quality information that was in the regional council, which are water quality reports, and put them in a way we can actually understand what's going on. And then they came back again and they said, thanks for the doorstop, that was good. But could you break that down and put it into our local communities? So we broke that down and we put it in local communities. And then we funded them through MPI to run, and this was, got to take my hat off to MPI because we never thought we'd get this through, to run projects that they wanted to run. So there was, so Thriving Southland does the reporting and with MPI and runs the projects, and they just get on with projects they want to do. And there's multiple projects throughout Southland and they're all different. And it's not all about water and it's not all about water quality because you can't separate one from the whole. So when you're looking at water quality, you've got to think about climate change because there's actually contending issues when you look at the science around you might do X for the climate, but from a water quality perspective, it might have a negative outcome. But this is, all we're doing is giving that information to farmers. And in the last 2 years, I've seen conversations go from within a catchment group, it's all your fault, it's your fault, we're at the head of the catchment and it's certainly not our fault, to actually understanding we're all part of the challenge and we all need to work on it. And what's our local challenge and how do we solve that? And I think it was interesting today. I was talking to somebody on the way here. There'd been a catchment group event in Hedgehope. They're looking at science, which is actually understanding what's beneath the surface, looking at from a radiometrics, understanding your soil types right down to into a paddock-based system, seeing where the wetlands were. Understanding that, understanding how to mitigate nutrients, understanding where's the best place, where's the bang for the buck, because I'll talk about that a slight. I won't go on too long. Sorry, Zeb. So where's the bang for the buck? If we're gonna invest, we've got so much to invest, and where do we need to do that to make the best difference? And this fascinating conversation had gone on this property, and two dairy farming brothers, and they'd come out of sheep and beef system. They'd had 3 generations on that farm. Their father and grandfather had drained it, and the father passed away just recently, actually. But they had a conversation before they started this work, and they said, "Hey, Dad, we understand the work you put in to drain this property to create productive land, but we're actually going to start undoing that work, and we're going to start putting wetlands back in." And you know what he turned around and said to them? And I didn't expect this to be the answer. He said, "You know what?" He said, "In the 1980s, I was paid to develop that land that you're talking about putting into wetland." He said, "I fought that for the last 50 years. It's cost us." And he said, "If I had my time," he said, "but I was actually under subsidies from the government. I was paid because they wanted more productive land to do that. So I did. That's what I did." He said, "If I had my time over, I wouldn't have done it." And so yeah, there's these gems that sit in our communities, in our farmers, and in the people. And so that history is really important to understand. but so you see the change, and the other, I suppose, so the two other things I really want to talk about is one, quite often I'll be at a group and there'll be those people who say we need to talk about profit. Now that's nearly a ooh, don't want to go there, don't want to talk about that, and actually just get on and do it, and it'll all turn out all right. Well, actually, if you're a farmer and you're looking for a pathway forward, first you need the science, the understanding, and which way are we going to head, and then you need clarity that I can actually afford to do this. We've worked with farmers, and there's different ages and stages, there's different debt levels, young people just coming into succession, and they'll say in their projects, well, we just want to know, we haven't got a lot to invest, and how do we do that? We've got a lot of debt, how do we do that? What's the best pathway forward? And they're looking for pathways. And back to that question, the next generation are really looking, and they're challenged, because they're challenged by, like those brothers who thought, their father would be really upset. And I've talked to another young guy who said, well, actually, yes, I could replant all that, but literally my father will bring a gun and he'll shoot me, because he cleared it. And it's really quite sad, but it's actually a change in the way we look at development and value. And we're also trying to link that to our overseas consumers, and actually our at-home consumers, and social license, and what are they really looking for? So I think a lot of the projects we do, we actually put the numbers around it. So this, and actually we've just done a piece of work looking at using your landscape, looking at your farm system to get reductions. And actually, once you start pulling all the levers, you can do a lot with, and it's not going to cost the same as major shift. And this is a shift over time, so everything's moving over time. I say in 2 years, we've gone from farmers and people pointing the finger at each other to actually sitting around the table, having those conversations. And yesterday, Jenny just told me there was another group. They're looking at greenhouse gas emissions, carbon neutral Dipton. Who would have thought, in the middle of all the arguing around greenhouse gas and emissions, that a group of farmers and their local community would get together and stick their hand up? In fact, when they first said to me, we're going to call it carbon neutral Dipton, even I said, are you sure you want to do that? And they went ahead and they did it. And they're modelling, how far can we go? What would it cost? What are the things we can do? And there's a lot of science there now, and some of the work you guys are doing, it's there now to be adopted, but it's not getting to the ground. It's not getting to, and that's the beauty of catchment groups. It's the discussion about the science and the understanding of what's going on that matters to the people on the ground who've got to actually implement it. And they've also got families, and they want to support, and they've got to financially be confident that we can move forward in that space. It's always going to be a challenge, but I sort of think of it, it's no different to if you're working in town and Rob came along and said, we're going to lift your rates by 20% for all this water and sewage work that we need to do. Actually, things are tough. You're going to have to take a pay cut, and don't worry about your mortgage. It'll all sort out in the end of the day. You've got to actually think about everything within it. So I say profit is really how we pay our, you've got to think about that in the whole picture, and not be afraid to talk about it, and not be afraid to say, what does this cost, and what does it cost the community? Because actually, when you start moving, you start realizing it's probably more expensive to sit still. If we sit still, the world's moving. The world's moving quickly, and it's a real challenge for farmers, and it's a challenge for all of us, how quickly things are moving. So if there's one message, get involved, get along, talk to people, and understand where they come from. Because shouting at people now, it's like, yeah, we know, because it's been pretty loud. But it's now about finding solutions and being part of the solution. So that's it from me. I say and I'm not going to take credit for any of the work that's being done. It's being done by the community, and it's being done by catchment groups, and I say we're just there to support. But the model has been great, because it's about ground up policy. It does not create ground up change, and it becomes broad, and it's not specific. So ground change is our one focus, and everything we do, we go back and we ask our catchment groups, what do you want, what do you need, which is really difficult because I get carried away by big ideas, and then everybody else goes, did you actually ask anybody about that? It's really easy to run away without going back and engaging. So engage with those on the other end of the scale and just sit there and have those conversations, because that's really important to come in around change and move. But to say, I just can't get over how far, when you give people the information and the understanding, we've moved in 2 years, 2.5 years. So, yeah, I slow down to speed up is our motto. So don't push it. Yeah. So thanks, Seb, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. And happy to take questions. Sort of happy.
How many catchment groups are there?
35. Interesting. When we started, we thought they'd be like 4 on each major river, and they've actually broken down into their own communities with people they know and people they trust, because they can come out with those big ideas, and they know who's going to shoot them down and not too worried about him. But it's actually about community, and it's community driving change. So when they first started breaking apart, I said, how do you service all these? But it's amazing how, because they're in their own communities, they trust each other, and they're working together. They don't have to drive an hour and a half to the catchment group meeting. They step across the hedge. So it's about those in place, communities. Any other? Yeah. I'm standing between you and food, so yeah. Appreciate the yeah. If there's any questions, you do catch up. Yeah. Thanks, Ed.